In 1996, a team of scientists arrived at a 520-acre cattle ranch in the Uinta Basin of eastern Utah. They came with night vision cameras, electromagnetic sensors, seismic equipment, and every scientific instrument available to serious researchers at the end of the 20th century. They were funded by a billionaire aerospace entrepreneur who believed, based on what he had heard, that this property was worth serious study. They stayed for 8 years. When they left, they had terabytes of data, hundreds of documented incidents, and footage that has never been fully explained. What they did not have was an answer. In 2007, the United States Department of Defense became involved. A classified program, codenamed AAWSAP, was established with a direct mandate to investigate the property and its surrounding region. The budget allocated was $22 million of American taxpayer money. The program ran for 2 years. The investigators produced reports. Those reports have been partially declassified. What they describe in the careful and measured language of government documents is a catalog of phenomena that the most powerful military intelligence apparatus in the world could not explain. UFOs, cattle mutilated with surgical precision, poltergeist activity witnessed by military personnel, creatures emerging from what witnesses described as portals opening in midair, and a property that seemed, by every account of everyone who spent serious time on it, to be aware of the people studying it, to be watching them back. Skinwalker Ranch is the most intensively investigated paranormal location in the United States, possibly in the world. The government spent $22 million trying to understand it. They couldn't. This is the story of the ranch the government won't explain. The Uinta Basin is a high desert valley in northeastern Utah, ringed by the Uinta Mountains to the north and the Tavaputs Plateau to the south. It is semi-arid, sparsely populated, and far from the major population centers of the American West. The town of Vernal, the nearest community of any significance to Skinwalker Ranch, has a population of around 10,000 people. Beyond it, the basin stretches out in sagebrush, red rock, and silence. This is not a glamorous landscape. It is not the dramatic canyon country of southern Utah that draws millions of tourists. The Uinta Basin is working land, oil fields, cattle grazing, small agricultural operations. It has been inhabited for thousands of years by the Ute people, and the Ute oral tradition contains, in its oldest layers, accounts of this specific area of the basin as a place of exceptional strangeness, a place where the boundary between the seen world and the unseen world is thin. In Ute tradition, the land that would become Skinwalker Ranch lies at the edge of territory associated with the Navajo. And the Navajo concept of the Skinwalker, a malevolent shape-shifting figure of extraordinary power, capable of moving between forms and between worlds, is for some researchers deeply connected to what has been reported on this property for generations. The Utah Highway Patrol received so many UFO reports from the Uinta Basin during the 1970s that their officers stopped filing incident reports. Not because the reports were being investigated and resolved, because they were too many. This is the context in which Skinwalker Ranch exists, not as an isolated anomaly, as the intense center of a region that has been strange for as long as anyone has lived in it or kept records of it. The specific property, 512 acres in the basin near the town of Ballard, has had various owners over the decades. Each family that occupied it reported things. The Sherman family, who bought the ranch in 1994, were the ones who finally forced the wider world to pay attention. Terry and Gwen Sherman were ranchers, not paranormal enthusiasts, not people who had any particular interest in UFOs or the supernatural. They were practical people who bought a property to run cattle on and arrived expecting to work the land. What happened to them over the following 18 months has been documented in the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, written by Colm Kelleher and researcher George Knapp. It is the foundational document of the modern Skinwalker Ranch case, and what it describes, drawn from the Shermans' own accounts and from the subsequent scientific investigation, is a family under siege by something they could not name, could not fight, and could not escape. The first thing the Shermans noticed was the cattle.
The cattle mutilations began almost immediately after the Shermans arrived. Not gradual degradation, not disease, not predation. Surgical removal of specific organs, ears, eyes, reproductive organs, with cuts described by veterinary professionals who examined the carcasses as beyond the capability of known predators. Cuts consistent with, in their professional opinion, extremely sharp instruments applied with precision. No blood at the scene, no tracks around the carcass, no evidence that any living creature had approached the animal before or after its death. This pattern, the specific signature of what investigators call exotic cattle mutilation, has been reported across multiple states and multiple decades. It is not unique to Skinwalker Ranch, but on the Sherman property, it was concentrated, frequent, and documented from the first months of their occupancy. Then came the orbs, floating luminescent spheres ranging in size from a basketball to something considerably larger, moving across the property at night, not following any ballistic trajectory, not behaving like any known natural phenomenon. Moving with what multiple witnesses described as apparent intention, pausing, changing direction, approaching people, retreating. The Shermans saw them repeatedly, their children saw them, neighbors from the surrounding land saw them. Terry Sherman, a practical rancher who was not given to imagination, described watching an orb approach him across a field one night. It stopped, at a distance he estimated as about 50 feet. He said it had the quality of something looking at him. He said he had the distinct, visceral sense of being examined. He shone a flashlight at it. It went dark and disappeared. Then, the wolf. This is the incident from the Sherman period that has been cited most frequently in subsequent accounts of the ranch, because it sits at the precise intersection of physical reality and inexplicable outcome in a way that is very difficult to dismiss. Terry Sherman shot a wolf. Not unusual in itself. Ranchers deal with predators. But this wolf, at close range with a high-powered rifle, did not go down. He shot it multiple times. He hit it. He could see the impacts. The animal did not fall. It did not flee in the manner of a wounded animal. It eventually moved away across the field, and by multiple accounts of people who searched the area afterward, it left no blood trail. No body was ever found. A wolf that absorbed multiple direct rifle shots at close range and walked away. Terry Sherman was a man who had handled firearms his entire life. He was not confused about whether he had hit the animal. He had hit it multiple times. And it had not died. What was it? The Shermans began cataloging every incident. They kept notes, dates, descriptions. The catalog grew rapidly. Lights in the sky, not just orbs but structured craft, objects with defined shapes and edges, moving in ways that no aircraft of the 1990s could move. Hovering, accelerating from a standing start to extreme speed instantaneously, changing direction without any deceleration arc, making no sound. The poltergeist activity inside the farmhouse was simultaneously building. Objects moved. Machinery malfunctioned in ways that mechanics could not account for. The television would behave strangely. The dogs would react to things in the yard that the Shermans could not see, reacting not with normal alert behavior, but with terror. Pressing against the walls, refusing to go outside. And then, the portals. This is the element of the Sherman period that even sympathetic researchers have handled most carefully, because it is the element most resistant to any conventional framework. Multiple members of the Sherman family reported witnessing what they described as tears opening in the air. Not vague distortions, structured openings, visible, through which something could be seen that was not the landscape behind them. On at least one documented occasion, Terry Sherman reported seeing something emerge from one of these openings. Something large, something animal in general shape, but not in specific detail. Something that moved, and then was gone. Gwen Sherman, years later in an interview, described the moment she understood that whatever was on their property was not something they could manage, or explain, or get used to. She described a specific night when she looked out of the window of the farmhouse and saw lights moving across the pasture. Not one light, multiple lights, in an arrangement that suggested something structured behind them. Moving slowly, then stopping. Then the lights went out, and in the darkness where they had been, she heard something she could not describe except to say that it sounded like it was aware of her watching. The Shermans contacted newspapers and researchers. Kelleher and Knopp came. Their accounts were taken seriously for a specific reason. The Shermans were not seeking attention or money or fame. They were ranchers who were frightened and needed someone to take them seriously. They eventually sold the ranch to Robert Bigelow for approximately $200,000, not because Bigelow thought it would solve it, because they could no longer live on it.
Robert Bigelow was not a casual enthusiast. The founder of Bigelow Aerospace, a company with serious contracts in the commercial space sector, he had a long-standing personal interest in the paranormal that he had pursued quietly before Skinwalker Ranch entered his awareness. When he acquired the property, he did not go there with a ghost meter and a video camera. He established the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, and he staffed it with serious people. The NIDS team that moved on to Skinwalker Ranch in 1996 included a retired Army intelligence colonel, a physicist, a ufologist of international standing, biologists, and veterinary pathologists. They brought night vision cameras, infrared sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, seismic monitors, and surveillance equipment capable of covering the property around the clock. They set up a trailer as their base of operations and began systematic observation. And immediately, the ranch went quiet. This is one of the most consistent and most frustrating features of the Skinwalker Ranch case across every investigation it has hosted. When investigators arrive with equipment and explicit intent to document phenomena, the phenomena tended to diminish. Investigators described arriving after a period of intense activity, setting up their cameras and sensors, and sitting through days and weeks of complete normality. And then, the moment they let their guard down, the moment one investigator turned away from the camera or went back to the trailer or simply stopped paying full attention, something would happen. Just out of frame. Just beyond the sensor's range, just far enough from the witness position that the account that resulted was compelling but not conclusive. The ranch, multiple investigators concluded, was playing with them.
This is not a comfortable conclusion for a team of scientists, but it is what the data suggested. A haunted location does not tend to perform for cameras. Skinwalker Ranch, across years of investigation by multiple teams, demonstrated a remarkable consistency of phenomena occurring at the edge of documentation. Close enough to be witnessed, far enough to avoid being captured in definitive form. What NIDS did capture and document, despite the ranch's apparent reluctance to perform, was substantial. Night vision footage of structured aerial objects moving above the property with flight characteristics inconsistent with any known aircraft. Objects captured simultaneously on multiple cameras from different positions, ruling out optical artifact. Objects that appeared, moved, and vanished without leaving any radar signature on equipment the team had brought specifically to detect them. Cattle mutilations documented with veterinary precision. Carcasses examined within hours of discovery, with the wound characteristics photographed and measured. The cuts were clean in a way that field investigations consistently found difficult to attribute to known predators or human intervention. The absence of blood, the absence of surrounding disturbance, the surgical specificity of the tissue removal, documented, photographed, entered into the research record. Poltergeist incidents witnessed by NIDS team members themselves. The scientist who went back to the trailer to find equipment moved. The investigator who heard a voice in a field with no one near him. The researcher who, sitting in a vehicle on a clear night with no one else present, watched the door handle of the locked vehicle turn from the outside. And then the incident that became one of the most discussed events in the documented history of the ranch. A NIDS investigator on night patrol saw a large orb moving across the south pasture. He followed it. The orb paused. Then, as the investigator watched, the orb opened. Not exploded, not disappeared, opened, like a window cut in the air with something visible through it that was not the pasture on the other side. The opening was brief. It closed. The orb was gone. The investigator stood alone in a pasture in the dark in Utah and tried to find language for what he had just seen. He came back to the trailer and reported it. He was a serious scientist. He did not believe in portals. He had not believed in any of what he was documenting before he arrived at Skinwalker Ranch. He believed in what he saw. NIDS concluded their primary investigation in 2004 after 8 years on the property. Their internal reports were not made public. Kelleher and Knapp's book, published in 2005, drew from those reports and from interviews with team members to create the first comprehensive public account of what had been found. Their conclusion was specific and careful. They could not explain what was happening at Skinwalker Ranch. They could not attribute it to any known natural phenomenon. They could not confirm a supernatural explanation. They stated that the phenomena were real, that they were documented, and that they were outside the scope of any framework currently available to science. Then, the government arrived.
In 2007, Harry Reid, then the Senate Majority Leader, was briefed on the Skinwalker Ranch research by Robert Bigelow. Harry had a long-standing interest in UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, having received constituent reports from across Nevada for years. What Bigelow showed him, and what Reid subsequently investigated through his Senate position, led him to believe that the phenomena being reported at Skinwalker Ranch and the broader Uinta Basin warranted serious government attention. He made it happen. The Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, AAWASP, was established within the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2008. It was funded through a classified budget earmark secured by Reid and 2 colleagues. The initial funding, $22 million. $22 million of American taxpayer money directed through classified channels at a cattle ranch in Utah and the surrounding region. The program contracted with Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Studies, BASS, to conduct the investigation. BASS brought military personnel, intelligence analysts, and scientific investigators onto the property. They operated under the full authority and resources of the DIA. What they found has been partially declassified through subsequent FOIA requests and through the work of journalists including George Knapp and documentary makers who have spent years on this case. The BASS reports describe, in the measured language of defense intelligence documents, phenomena that the investigators could not explain. Structured aerial objects detected by multiple sensor systems simultaneously, electromagnetic anomalies that disrupted equipment without apparent cause, physical effects on personnel, investigators experiencing nausea, disorientation, and what the reports describe as cognitive anomalies while on the property, and cattle mutilations, documented by military investigators with the same surgical precision and the absence of explanatory mechanism that had been documented by NIDS and by ranchers across the basin for decades. The AAWASP program ran until 2010. It was then restructured into a related program, AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which continued until 2017. The combined years of official United States government investigation into the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch and the surrounding region represent, by any measure, an extraordinary commitment of intelligence resources. What did the government conclude? The declassified summaries are careful and incomplete. They acknowledge the phenomena. They describe them as anomalous. They state that they could not be attributed to known human technology, known natural phenomena, or any other source within the existing knowledge base of the investigators. They do not say what the source is. In 2019, the New York Times, not a paranormal publication, not a tabloid, the newspaper of record, published a lengthy investigation into AATIP and its predecessor programs. The response from the wider public was significant, and it was followed in 2021 by the release of the Pentagon's official UAP report, the first public acknowledgement by the United States government that it had been tracking unidentified aerial phenomena, that it could not explain them, and that it considered them a matter of national security. Skinwalker Ranch is mentioned in various declassified materials as a location of interest to this ongoing investigation. The ranch that a ranching family abandoned in the mid-1990s because they could no longer live on it has been studied at various points by a billionaire's private research institute, military intelligence investigators, and the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States government. None of them have an answer. The current owner of Skinwalker Ranch is Brandon Fugel, a Utah real estate developer who purchased the property in 2016. Fugel has been explicit that he arrived at the ranch as a skeptic. He has been equally explicit that he did not remain one. He described in interviews conducted since his purchase multiple personal paranormal experiences on the property, including a UAP sighting in broad daylight with multiple witnesses present. He invested in scientific monitoring infrastructure across the ranch, seismic sensors, atmospheric monitoring, high-speed cameras, ground-penetrating radar. He made the ranch the subject of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch series that has run for 7 seasons. The series has captured things: high-speed camera footage of objects moving across the ranch at speeds that the aeronautical engineers on the investigation team have been unable to attribute to any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. ground-penetrating radar detecting subsurface anomalies, structures, apparently, that should not be there, in configurations that do not match any geological formation the geologists on the team can identify. Electronic voice phenomena captured during formal investigation sessions, including voices asking questions. The ranch continues to produce phenomena. The investigation continues. The answer remains beyond reach.
Before there were ranchers, before there were investigators with night vision cameras and government budgets, before Robert Bigelow and Brandon Fugal and the History Channel, before any of it, the land was already strange. In 1776, a Franciscan missionary named Silvestre Velez de Escalante was traveling through what is now Utah on an expedition to find a route from New Mexico to the California missions. He camped in the Uinta Basin. And in his journal, a document that predates the United States, that predates the state of Utah by over a century, he wrote about strange fireballs appearing over his campfire. Fireballs over a campfire in the Uinta Basin in 1776. The Ute people who have lived in this region for thousands of years have their own accounts of this land. Their oral tradition describes the specific area around what is now Skinwalker Ranch as a place they avoided, not out of fear exactly, but out of respect for something they understood to be present there, something that did not belong to the ordinary world. The term Skinwalker itself, the name that became attached to this property, comes not from Navajo, but from Navajo. In Navajo belief, a Yinaldloshi, a being that walks on all fours, is a malevolent figure capable of transforming into animals and using supernatural powers for harmful ends. The attribution of this concept to the Utah Ranch is, from a cultural standpoint, complex and contested. Navajo elders have objected to the casual use of the term in connection with paranormal entertainment. But the geographic and cultural fact remains. The land in and around this part of the Uinta Basin has been identified by the indigenous peoples who know it best as exceptional, as a place where the rules are different. Research into the geological properties of the basin has produced findings that some scientists believe may be relevant. The region sits atop unusual geological structures, combinations of rock formations and underground water systems that produce, in some analyses, electromagnetic anomalies measurable at the surface. Concentrations of quartz and specific mineral combinations that can, under the right conditions, generate piezoelectric effects, the production of electrical charge under mechanical pressure. These geological factors do not explain a portal opening in midair. They do not explain a wolf absorbing multiple rifle shots. They do not explain the surgical cattle mutilations or the structured aerial craft, or the investigator watching a door handle turn from the outside of a locked vehicle. But they may explain why this specific piece of land, rather than any of the thousands of similar ranches in the western United States, has been generating these reports for longer than living memory. Something about this land is different. Whether that difference is geological, supernatural, interdimensional, or something else entirely, something for which we do not yet have a category or a name, is the question that 2 decades of serious investigation have brought us to the edge of, without crossing. We are at the edge of something. We cannot see what is on the other side. Former Senator Harry Reid, the man who secured the $22 million of government funding, said before his death in 2021 that he believed the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch and sites like it represented the most important scientific question of the era. He said he believed that what was being encountered there was real, that it was beyond current human understanding,
and that the government's reluctance to engage with it publicly was a failure of the responsibility that public institutions owe to the people they serve. He said he was not ashamed of what he had done. He said he would do it again. A senator of the United States, $22 million, a cattle ranch in Utah, and still no answer.
People who have spent time on Skinwalker Ranch, investigators, journalists, television crews, the current owner's scientific team, describe something that is consistent across accounts and difficult to attribute to suggestion or priming. A feeling of being watched. Not the vague, ambient unease that a person might feel in any isolated location at night. Something specific, directional. The sensation of attention, of a focused, intelligent regard coming from somewhere you cannot identify. You turn toward it, and there is nothing. But it does not stop. Brandon Fugel, who arrived at the ranch as a committed skeptic, described this experience extensively in interviews. He described his first significant personal encounter as arriving at a point where he could no longer attribute what he was feeling to expectation or anxiety. He said the experience of being on the ranch at night, specifically in the South Field, the area of most concentrated historical activity, produced in him something he had never felt anywhere else. Not fear exactly, something more fundamental. The specific disorientation of a person whose framework for understanding the world has stopped working. Investigators on the current science team have described physical effects that some of them experienced personally, effects documented in the BAAS reports and consistent with what Sherman family members described in the 1990s. Nausea in specific locations on the property, disorientation that resolves when you leave the area and returns when you re-enter it, headaches that appear and disappear with specific geographic precision. One investigator described entering a corner of the north pasture and experiencing a sudden and overwhelming conviction that something very large was directly behind him. He turned. There was nothing. He stepped out of the area. The conviction disappeared. He stepped back in. It returned. He repeated this several times. The experience was consistently reproduced. The dogs on the property, working dogs, bred for ranch conditions, not animals that spook easily, have been documented repeatedly refusing to enter certain areas of the ranch, not approaching an area and shying away, full stopping, sitting down, refusing to move. Animals know things. Whatever the dogs are sensing in those areas of Skinwalker Ranch, they find it sufficiently extreme to override their training and their instinct to follow commands. The ranch has produced, across 30 years of documented investigation, a consistent picture of a property that is aware of the people on it, that responds to attention, that demonstrates what researchers have come to call intelligent behavior, a quality of interaction with investigators that goes beyond the passive phenomena of a standard haunting. It sees you. The question that every serious researcher who has spent time on Skinwalker Ranch comes back to is the same question. And it is not, what is it? Though that is the obvious question. It is something more fundamental. What does it want?